The creation of the atomic bomb, known as the Manhattan Project, was a gargantuan undertaking driven by one overriding fear: that Nazi Germany would develop a nuclear weapon first. However, within the highly secretive scientific community, another, far more existential fear took root. As the physicists raced to unlock the secrets of the atom, they realized they were navigating entirely uncharted territory where the fundamental properties of matter were poorly understood. This led to two terrifying, simultaneous anxieties: the possibility of a complete, spectacular failure of the device, or worse, a success so powerful it would spiral entirely out of control. The stakes were literally the future of the world. They were attempting to harness a power never before seen on Earth, relying on untested theories and unverified calculations. The project had to be kept absolutely secret, not just from enemies, but from the public and even much of the American government, meaning the terrifying. Scientific uncertainties could not be shared or publicly debated. The burden of this unprecedented gamble fell entirely on the shoulders of the project's lead scientists. The bomb project focused on two types of fissile material: uranium-235 and plutonium-239. The uranium bomb, later dropped on Hiroshima, was relatively straightforward in design: the gun-type assembly. It involved shooting one piece of U-235 into another to achieve critical mass. The plutonium bomb, however, was inherently unstable and presented the project's greatest challenge. Plutonium was easier to produce in quantity, but it carried a fatal flaw. The plutonium produced at the Hanford reactors was dirty, containing trace amounts of the isotope U-240, which made it highly reactive. If assembled too slowly, the plutonium would begin to fission prematurely, causing the bomb to simply fizzle out in a small, non-nuclear explosion, destroying the city-sized effort and revealing the project to the world. This risk of pre-detonation meant the standard gun design would not work for plutonium. A radical, instantaneous method was required, demanding the invention of the highly complex implosion mechanism. To solve the pre-detonation risk of plutonium, the scientists at Los Alamos, under the direction of J. Robert Oppenheimer, developed the implosion mechanism. This required perfectly shaped conventional high explosives to detonate simultaneously, creating an inward pressure wave that would compress the plutonium core to a critical density in a fraction of a microsecond. The core had to be squeezed uniformly and instantaneously from all sides, like crushing a grape without deforming its spherical shape. The challenge was unprecedented. Achieving this perfect, symmetrical squeeze required developing specialized explosive lenses made of different types of high explosives that controlled the shock wave like glass controls light. The engineering had to be accurate to within a few hundredths of a microsecond. If the implosion was flawed, the entire device would fail, resulting in a fizzle that would scatter deadly plutonium dust across the New Mexico desert. The implosion design was so uncertain that it was the only one deemed complex enough to require a full-scale test before use in combat. The most chilling scientific secret kept during the entire project was the ignition question. This terrifying hypothesis was first raised by physicist Edward Teller. Teller theorized that the immense heat and pressure generated by the fission explosion might not just release energy locally, but could initiate a self-sustaining thermonuclear reaction in the surrounding environment. Specifically, the reaction might ignite the Earth's atmosphere, which is largely composed of nitrogen and oxygen, while Hans Bethe, a leading theorist, eventually performed calculations that suggested the probability of total global ignition was extremely low. Neither he nor any other scientist could prove the risk was zero. When Oppenheimer presented the risk to General Leslie Groves, the project head, Groves allegedly accepted the risk, arguing that victory over the Axis was paramount. This uncertainty meant that the scientists stepping back from the Trinity test site were not just worried about failure, but were secretly betting against the complete annihilation of the planet. The decision was made. The implosion device, codenamed the Gadget, had to be tested. The test site was a desolate area of the New Mexico desert on the Alamogordo bombing range, now known as Trinity. The logistics of the test were immense, requiring thousands of personnel to construct the infrastructure necessary for the high-risk experiment. The most visible feature was a massive 100-foot-tall steel tower erected to hold the Gadget, ensuring the explosion occurred at a height that maximized its destructive effect while minimizing local fallout. Security was paramount. The location was chosen for its isolation, yet the entire area had to be guarded by soldiers to prevent unauthorized access or detection by enemy reconnaissance. The preparations were conducted under intense secrecy, with even the construction workers often unaware they were building the stage for the most momentous event in human history. Every piece of equipment, from the delicate detonators to the complex monitoring instruments, had to be perfect, because failure meant not only the loss of billions of dollars and years of effort, but potentially conceding the nuclear race. The scientists were so unsure of the implosion design's success that they developed a massive, elaborate failsafe, Jumbo. Jumbo was a gigantic, thick-walled steel cylinder, 25 feet long and weighing 214 tons. Its sole purpose was to contain the active plutonium core and high explosives in the event of a catastrophic failure, meaning a non-nuclear explosion or fizzle. If the high explosives detonated but the implosion mechanism failed to achieve critical mass, Jumbo was designed to contain the ensuing blast, allowing the recovery of the incredibly scarce and expensive plutonium. However, as confidence grew in the implosion mechanism just weeks before the test, the scientists decided that Jumbo's weight would complicate the setup too much. In a breathtaking display of last-minute confidence and immense risk, they opted to hang the Gadget unprotected from the steel tower, leaving Jumbo nearby as a silent, unused monument to their earlier uncertainty. This decision amplified the stakes tenfold. In the final days leading up to the test, scheduled for 4 a.m. on the 16th of July, 1945, the team faced extreme pressure. Robert Oppenheimer and his lead team meticulously oversaw the final assembly of the Gadget in a nearby farmhouse, wiring the complex array of 32 detonators designed to fire simultaneously. The precise timing and arrangement of these wires were the last line of defense against a catastrophic fizzle. The weather, however, refused to cooperate. A powerful pre-dawn thunderstorm rolled in, bringing heavy rain, lightning, and high winds. The rain threatened to damage the sensitive equipment and the risk of a lightning strike. Near the plutonium core was an unacceptable danger. General Groves, concerned that the lightning could prematurely detonate the high explosives, ordered a delay. The fate of the world's first nuclear weapon rested precariously on a tower in the middle of a lightning storm, forcing the nervous scientists and military leaders to wait hours for a small window of clear weather. After hours of agonizing delay, the storm finally cleared, and the test was rescheduled for 5:30 a.m. As the final minutes ticked down, the mood in the bunkers and observation points, located 6 miles away, was a mixture of intense fear and exhilaration. Scientists took bets on the yield of the device, with estimates ranging wildly from a complete fizzle to a bomb equivalent of 18,000 tons of TNT. Crucially, the lingering fear of the ignition question, the possibility of the chain reaction spiraling into the atmosphere, remained a silent dread, shared among the top physicists. The final countdown was called out over the public address system. The device was armed, and the automatic timers took over. The risk was now absolute. If the implosion failed, the project failed. If the implosion succeeded, the power released could be unlike anything imagined, forever changing the nature of warfare and existence itself. Every eye turned to the darkened desert sky, waiting for the most audacious gamble in human history to either vanish in a puff of smoke or erupt in nuclear fire. At 5:30 a.m. on the 16th of July, 1945, the Trinity test detonated. The remote desert was instantly illuminated by a blinding flash of light, unlike anything ever witnessed. For the observers, the silence was initially absolute, a disorienting moment as the light reached their eyes long before the sound could travel the 6 miles to the bunkers. The flash was brighter than the midday sun, scorching the desert sand into a new, glassy green substance called trinitite. The color of the fireball shifted instantly from brilliant white to orange and then deep red as it began its ascent. Seconds later, the colossal noise arrived, described as a primeval roar, a continuous clap of thunder that echoed across the New Mexico landscape for hundreds of miles. The mushroom cloud began its terrifying ascent, boiling over 10 miles into the atmosphere. The yield of the device, measured by the instruments, was approximately 20 kilotons of TNT, vastly exceeding the most optimistic predictions. The gadget was a bang, spectacular success, demonstrating a horrifying new power that had been feared but never truly proven. In the observation bunkers, the initial shock gave way to profound relief and stunned silence. The sheer magnitude of the explosion immediately confirmed that the complex implosion mechanism had worked perfectly, solving the critical pre-detonation problem that had plagued the plutonium bomb design. The success was relayed immediately in a coded message to General Leslie Groves, who was awaiting confirmation that his multi-billion-dollar project had delivered. However, the scientists were also overwhelmed by the power they had unleashed. Richard Feynman, a young physicist, famously gauged the strength of the blast not by the light, but by watching the shadows cast by the explosion on the wall of his bunker, realizing the light was brighter than day. The roar of the explosion signaled the end of the war as they knew it and the successful beginning of the nuclear age. The anxiety over the technical failure was replaced by the full, terrifying realization of the moral success. One of the most intensely relieved men present was Edward Teller. Teller had championed the terrifying ignition question, the hypothesis that the fission device could ignite the atmosphere. As the immense cloud rose and the Earth remained intact, Teller's immediate, visible relief was palpable. The calculations of his colleague Hans Bethe, suggesting the global ignition risk was negligible, had been proven correct. The world had survived the experiment. However, Teller's mind was already racing beyond the successful test. As the Trinity fireball dissipated, Teller was already consumed by the idea of an even more powerful weapon, the thermonuclear or hydrogen bomb. The vast energy released by the fission bomb instantly provided the spark necessary to pursue the much larger fusion weapon. The success of the Manhattan Project immediately created the shadow of the next, far more destructive weapon, ensuring the arms race would continue, not end, with the end of the Second World War. The immediate, astonishing success of the Trinity test was rushed into the political sphere. The news of the immense yield was transmitted directly to President Harry S. Truman, who was at the Potsdam Conference demanding the unconditional surrender of Japan. The success of the test immediately stiffened his resolve, providing him with a terrifying, decisive tool to end the war without a costly invasion. For the scientists, the initial euphoria gave way to deep moral questioning. Having successfully built the device out of fear of German success, the scientists now possessed a weapon of unparalleled destructive capability, and the moral burden shifted from creation to use. Many scientists, including Leo Szilard and even Oppenheimer, immediately began grappling with the moral and political implications of their creation, desperately trying to influence how the power they unleashed would be controlled. The secret of the bomb's successful creation gave way to the public ethical dilemma of its necessary use. Despite the spectacular success of the Trinity test, the moral dilemma concerning the use of the bomb intensified. Many scientists, deeply concerned by the potential for a global nuclear arms race, signed petitions urging President Truman to demonstrate the bomb's power to the Japanese on an uninhabited island rather than dropping it on a city. They argued that the sheer magnitude of the weapon's destructive capability demanded a different standard of deployment. Ultimately, the political and military momentum, fueled by General Groves and Secretary of War Henry Stimson, proved unstoppable. The decision was made to use the two available bombs immediately to force a quick end to the brutal war in the Pacific. Just weeks after the Trinity blast confirmed the bomb's viability, the uranium gun-type device was dropped on Hiroshima, and the implosion-type plutonium device, the successor to the gadget, was dropped on Nagasaki. The scientific plea for caution was overruled by the demands of war. Even after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki made the existence of the atomic weapon public, the details of the Trinity test remained the greatest secret of the entire project. The scientists successfully convinced General Groves to maintain absolute secrecy regarding the technical details of the implosion device and, crucially, the pre-detonation challenges and the ignition question. The fear was that revealing the intricacies of the implosion design would give foreign powers, specifically the Soviet Union, a direct shortcut to developing their own bomb. For years, the U.S. government released sanitized, misleading information about the Trinity site, attributing the devastation to an explosion of a major ammunition depot. The scientific community maintained the collective silence out of patriotic duty and fear of espionage, successfully protecting the highly complex physics behind the plutonium core. This sustained secrecy effectively concealed the full extent of the scientific gamble taken on that New Mexico morning. While the world survived the theoretical risk of atmospheric ignition, the success of the Trinity test guaranteed the birth of the nuclear arms race. The Soviet Union, having been successfully spied upon the project, detonated its own device just 4 years later, shattering the American nuclear monopoly. The world was plunged into the Cold War, defined by the constant, terrifying fear of mutual destruction. The greatest legacy of the Trinity test is not the initial military victory, but the enduring existential threat that it unveiled. The scientists' theoretical fears of runaway chain reactions were replaced by the political reality of escalating arsenals. The test proved that humanity had acquired the power to destroy itself, and the scientific uncertainty surrounding the original experiment was replaced by the geopolitical certainty that this power could not be put back into the box. The single greatest secret of the Manhattan Project was not the existence of the bomb itself, but the immense scientific and engineering uncertainty that lay at the heart of the final device. The project succeeded only because the scientists, against incredible odds and with limited prior experience, solved the complex instability of plutonium and perfected the implosion mechanism, simultaneously surviving the theoretical risk of global ignition. The failure was not in the device's yield, but in the catastrophic nature of the potential failure, the complete and total loss of the project, or worse, the end of the world. The story of the Trinity test is the story of history's most audacious and terrifying gamble, a moment where the fear of the unknown was momentarily conquered by human ingenuity, forever changing the course of history and establishing the precedent for all future high-stakes scientific endeavors.